Good afternoon, everyone. It is Wednesday, February the 3rd, 2021. It is currently 1:57 p.m. Central Time, and I'm seated here in the sanctuary of Victory Baptist Church. We're live on the air, and we are probably about to walk into a storm. Yes, I'm about to walk into a massive storm. And I don't really want to walk into a massive storm, so I'm going to ask you to do this. I'm going to ask you to take a deep breath, to remain calm, and to listen to everything I have to say, to listen to every audio clip that I'm going to play, and that you put on your thinking caps and you try to be analytical and not emotional. You try to be rational, not just reactionary. Try to be thoughtful. Try to think. Try not just to react. Try not to speak. Try to be swift to hear and slow to speak. I don't know what other things I can ask you to do, but to hear me out. And I'm going to begin, hopefully in a way that's not controversial, but I want to begin in a way that's not controversial, but hopefully will give you something to really, really, really think about, because I think our entire perspective is so messed up that I really need to spend a lot of time trying to correct I think our initial perspective within Christianity, within the church right now, is so messed up that I really need to spend most of the time in this episode trying to correct that perspective to get everyone on the same page, on the right page, so that we even have any hopes of moving forward. I don't think we have any hopes of moving forward in a meaningful way until we get our perspective changed, our perspective fixed. Our vision needs to be, we need to get our eyes checked, because I think people are not seeing things correctly. This will all make sense, hopefully, by the time I'm done. So are you ready for a little bit of controversy? Are you ready for a storm? I probably should have started this with, a weather alert siren telling everyone, warning. We'll see where this is going to go. As always, I'm live on the air. If you're listening to me live using the Spreaker app, you can be a part of the conversation. There's a little chat symbol right there, a little chat icon. Just tap on it and you can start saying hello. You can ask questions. You can offer your thoughts, and you can tell me, you can share your perspective, or you can just start calling me names and telling me that I'm an idiot. Because by the time I'm done, trust me, about 50% of the audience, maybe even more, maybe I'm being naive, maybe 80% of the audience is probably going to think I'm an idiot. But we're going to do this anyway. Are you ready? So let me start with a question. I got to pick up my notebook here, because I wrote 4 things down here, and I'm going to ask this in a question. I'm going to put these 4 things into a question format. All right. Are you ready? What do you believe right now, 2021, February the 3rd, 2021? What do you believe right now is the greatest threat to the church in the United States of America? Do you believe that the greatest threat to the church right now in the United States of America, do you believe it's Christian nationalism? Oh, there's been lots of discussion about that. Christian nationalism. I've talked about it, articles all over the place about it. It's been in the news. Christian nationalism, in many cases, Christian nationalism has been linked to what happened in the Capitol on January the 6th. It's been linked to that. Christian nationalism, is that the greatest threat to the American church right now? Ask yourself, look around. I mean, what do you believe? Do you believe Christian nationalism is the most serious threat? Do you believe it's even in the top 3? Christian nationalism. Second, critical race theory. Critical race theory. Now, if you're not familiar with critical race theory, I don't know where you've been, but you need to tell me where you've been, because I want to go visit there, okay? Because critical race theory is talked about everywhere. People are up in arms about it. It's creating arguments. It's creating major problems in the Southern Baptist Convention. People are leaving the Southern Baptist Convention over critical race theory. A lot of people are being accused that, basically if you hold to critical race theory, you're not even a Christian. Your salvation is almost now connected with it. Critical race theory, it is causing some issues within Christianity, just like Christian nationalism is. But which is the greatest threat? Do you believe Christian nationalism is the greatest threat, or do you believe critical race theory is the greatest threat? Number 3, how about political hijacking? Do you believe that is the greatest threat to the church in the United States of America, where the church becomes so politically hijacked that its ideology, it's not theological anymore, it's political. Everything is viewed from a political framework, even though they try to make it theological, even though they claim it's scripture, it's really political. You can hear this again on American Family Radio, where they'll start a program acting like, here, we're about the Bible. Here, we're here to defend the truth of scripture. And then for the next 45 minutes on their program, they sound like they're the Rush Limbaugh Show, Sean Hannity, Mark Levine. You just name any, conservative talk show host, and they sound like they got their talking points from the Republican Party. And you're like, wait, are you there to really defend and talk about scripture? Because it sounds like all you can do is talk about politics. So what is the greatest threat to the American church? Christian nationalism? Critical race theory? Political hijacking of the church? Or here's one. Now, this one's not getting much attention. Do you believe the greatest threat to the American church right now is a spiritual sickness? A spiritual sickness. Now, we could describe the spiritual sickness in many ways. We could describe spiritual sickness as biblical illiteracy. Do we have a church today that is spiritually sick because the people are biblically illiterate? Do we have a church today in America that is sick because people are theologically illiterate? They can't even speak about theology in any meaningful way. Do we have a church today that is sick because they are historically illiterate? They're illiterate when it comes to church history. They can't tell you about the Council of Nicaea. They can't tell you about the first 7 ecumenical councils. They don't know about the creeds, the confessions, the councils. They can't tell you anything. They think church history started, with Billy Graham. It started with Rick Warren. Yeah. Oh, I know church history. Remember Rick Warren, that purpose-driven book? Yeah, I know church history. Is that the problem? Is there a spiritual sickness in the American church because the American church in large portions seem to be more preoccupied with fun, food, fellowship, and entertainment than equipping saints? Is the church spiritually sick because they're so distracted by everything in the world that they're not paying attention to the things of God? What is the greatest threat to the American church right now? Is it Christian nationalism? Is it critical race theory? Is it the political hijacking of the church, or is it a spiritual sickness? And all of these other things, Christian nationalism, critical race theory, and the political hijacking of the church, they are simply the fruit of the spiritual sickness. The spiritual sickness, the fruit that it's producing is all of these other things happening in the church that have nothing to do with scripture, have nothing to do with theology, nothing to do with church history, because the church is so spiritually sick that it's now producing this fruit that clearly demonstrates there's a sickness in the church. Do we see these other things as a fruit of a spiritual problem? And unless we address the spiritual problem, we're not going to address what is the true problem facing, the true danger facing the American church. I want to start right there. I obviously hold to, and I believe that the problem with the American church is spiritual sickness. I believe there is a spiritual sickness, and I believe these other issues is simply a fruit of what's going on. It's a symptom. It's not the disease. These things are symptoms. They're not the disease. The disease is spiritual. And we've got to get back to churches that set aside all of this other nonsense and get back to the teaching of Scripture, equipping saints, addressing things from a biblical perspective, teaching people how to think biblically, getting back to a biblical worldview. We need repentance. We need a spiritual awakening. The church is asleep. It needs to be awoken out of its slumber. Christians need to wake up. And I believe that's the problem. But even though I think that's the problem, in this episode, we're going to turn to an issue that is dividing many. And that is the subject of critical race theory. I'm going to do a little defining of critical race theory, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. But before we do so, I want to first, before we can even get to critical race theory, I want to talk about the issue of racism. And whenever you talk about the subject of racism, it seems that the reaction of many is very strong. They're like, well, I don't think racism is that big a deal. They want to deny it. Or the minute you start talking about racism, then you're immediately classified as, oh, you're woke, or you're liberal, or you believe in critical race theory, and and blah, 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 blah. You just want to blame white people, blah, whatever the case may be. And people react strongly. It appears we've reached a situation where even trying to discuss racism almost becomes impossible because people's reaction is so insane. Let me give you an example. I'll just give you one, a local example. A local church in the Abilene, Texas area. I'm here in Ovalla, Texas, so I live in Abilene, so I have to drive, north for about 20 minutes to get back to the Abilene city limits. I think it's about 20 minutes for me to get back to my house, which is on the outskirts of Abilene. So in the city of Abilene, it's a population of 120,000, I think now, maybe 125,000. I don't know what the population currently is. I think it's about 119, 120,000. It's a city with churches on pretty much every corner. 3 Christian universities, or at least Christian in name: McMurray University, which is Methodist; Abilene Christian University, ACU, which is Church of Christ; and Hardin-Simmons, sometimes we joke as being the Hardin Sinners, is the Baptist University. 3 Christian universities, a church in every corner. All right. Supposedly a part of like a kind of a town in the Bible Belt kind of idea. All right. But a church here in Abilene, Texas, or there in Abilene, Texas. I'm not currently sitting in Abilene, Texas. A church in Abilene decided they had an idea. You know what? There's a book right now that is and this is when they spoke it, which was, and I don't know how long ago. I can't remember how long ago this was. I think it was it had to be last year. Sometime last year. There's a book right now that everyone in the culture is talking about. Everyone in the world is talking about. Everyone's arguing about it. Everyone's fighting about it. So the church decided, hey, this is what we'll do. We'll have a little book club, and then we'll challenge everyone to get a copy of the book and then show up, and then we'll discuss the book. We'll discuss the contents of the book. Do we agree with it? Do we disagree with it? Are there some good points in the book? And guess what happened? It turned into a huge argument and fight, and people are like, I'm going to leave the church. How dare you even discuss this book? This is crazy. I'm not going to be a part of a church who would even discuss it. And you're like, whoa, why do you get so upset? You seem a little, I don't know, fragile? You seem like you have a hard time talking about this subject? And I'm saying that somewhat in a joking way, because that may give you an idea of the name of the book. The name of the book is White Fragility. White Fragility, which is, and this is the description, White Fragility, it was originally published on June the 26th, 2018. It's 192 pages. It's not even a big book. But White Fragility, why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. Why is it so hard for white people to talk about racism? Now, that's a good question. Now, whether you agree with the answer the book provides, that's a whole different story. But talking about the book White Fragility leads to, I'm going to leave my church. It wasn't going to be done like, we're going to do a series of sermons. This was going to be not during the preaching. Hey, members of the church, this is a big topic right now in our society. Let's get together and discuss it. Now, you could argue if you're going to get people together for the church, you probably need to do more biblical studies. But I think it's an interesting, why not get together and talk about it? Why not get together and discuss what's in the book and whether how should we view it from a biblical perspective? But no, people got upset, which seems to demonstrate, are we ever going to get the answer of why people are why white people are fragile and cannot talk about race? Are we ever going to get to the answer to the question? You can't get to the answer to the question, because as soon as you mention the book, you seem to show that people are too fragile to talk about it. Right? In fact, in some cases, people's reactions seem to make an argument that white people are too fragile because, of course, all the people who were upset were, oh yeah, guess what? White. So it just seems that this is what it appears to me. This is what it seems. Whenever you want to talk about racism, I think we have to acknowledge something happens here. White people will be the first to deny. No, there's not. There are racist people. Yes. It always goes something like this. There are racist people, but racism at large pretty much doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. I'm not racist. I don't know anyone who's racist. Our country's not racist. So yeah, there are racist people, but, and so the white person they get defensive. They almost want to just to say that it really is not a problem. But if you speak to people of color, people in the who represent a minority, people of different races who are not white, they may have a completely different experience, a completely different perspective. Now, who are we as white people to just deny their experience? Who are we to minimize their experience? Who are we to say, well, no, I'm sorry, you didn't really experience that. You didn't really experience that. I've told the story. Let me tell it again here. I heard a lot about, in the 1990s, I heard a lot about, obviously, racism. We had the different things that happened in LA. I heard a lot, and I would hear these stories and these accounts of on the news or things happening in society of different things that African Americans were experiencing. And all I could ever say is, I've never seen that. I've never experienced anything like that, because I grew up in Buffalo Gap, Texas, for crying out loud. Population, back then, 200 people. Wasn't it a traffic light in the entire town? Okay. Buffalo. Whoa. We had some major issues with racism there. Now, the only thing of race that I encountered a couple of things of race in when I was young. First, I won the South Side of Abilene, Texas. The South Side Abilene, Texas, one-on-one basketball tournament. I won the one-on-one basketball tournament for the South Side of Abilene. And guess who I played? It was all white people, all right? And I won. Great. Then I had to go to the North Side. So I was the South Side champion. There was someone on the North Side who was the North Side champion. So I was going to now go to the North Side to compete with some of the people who were in the tournament on the North Side to see how the South Side champ could compete with the people on the North Side. So I go to the North Side. Now, I'll just give you a hint of where I was. As I was going to where the gym was, I had to cross the Martin Luther King Jr. Bridge. Martin Luther King Jr. Bridge. Clearly, I was leaving the white side of town, and I was going to another part of town, a town that was dominated more by African Americans. Obviously, I'm crossing the Martin Luther King Jr. Bridge. Okay, so I crossed the bridge, pull into that rec center. Now, the person who took me was from the rec center where I won the tournament. He was African American. He was he didn't really coach me per se, but he was the guy in charge of the rec center. So he takes me over there. I walk into that gym. And I am the only white person in that gymnasium. I am completely the only one, period. Every person I play, they're not white. I'm the only white person. There's no one in the stands who are white. There's no one. I am literally the only white person there. That was the first time I was like, whoa, I kind of felt this. I felt it. I saw it. I kind of experienced it for a second of being, the minority. It was a different experience. But guess what my experience was? It was nothing but awesome. Now, I got destroyed and I got beat and I could not compete or even come close to the people who were playing with me. I was 5 foot. They were all taller. They all destroyed me. It was embarrassing. But guess what was awesome? The crowd, and for the most part, cheered for me. They were respectful. They were nice. Nothing mean. They afterwards, they all came up to everybody. Was nice. It was the best experience ever. It was super wonderful. All right. But that was that I didn't have a negative experience, right? I'm white. I go to an all black side of town, a black, the gym all filled with black people. I'm the only white person. And guess what? I have nothing negative to report. Not one negative thing said to me about me. I was made to feel welcome. It was awesome. Great. So I'm like, racism doesn't exist. Racism doesn't exist. Because that's my experience. But my experience changed dramatically one October evening in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Because I was with my friend who happened to be black. Our church did this hayride thing. I don't know. Don't even get me started on that. And so I had to go because if I didn't go, then I demonstrated supposedly I wasn't very spiritual because I didn't want to hang out with Christians at a hayride. Okay, but I had to go. So I showed up, and my friend, his wife, and my wife, they wanted to stay, and me and my friend were like, "No, let's go home and we can watch, I don't know, sports. I don't know what we wanted to do. We could go do anything other than hang out at a hayride." So he hops in the car with me. I'm driving. He's the passenger. We drive where we're outside of Council Bluffs, Iowa. We come into Council Bluffs, Iowa. I come up to a red light. I stop at the red light. I turn on my blinker. I turn. I make a right-hand turn. Next thing you know, I'm getting pulled over by the cops. Now, here's where the story gets really weird. The cops don't come up to my side of the car. I think it was a small truck I was driving. They don't come up to my side of the truck. They go to the passenger side where my friend, who happens to be black, is sitting. And they tap on the window. And they shine a flashlight through the window in his face. And he looks over and he says, "Roll down the window, boy." Whoa, what is going on? So he rolls down the window and they keep referring to him as boy. "I want to see your driver's license, boy." Wait a minute. He's not, and I'm like, he's not driving the car. Okay. You just need to be quiet. You need to be quiet. So they almost like trying to harass him. Now, I don't know what's going on. I've never experienced anything like this. It's crazy to me. And he starts getting mad and I'm just like, calm down, calm down. Finally, they come to my side. They tell me that I ran a red light. He's looking at me. I'm looking at him. I'm like, we didn't run a red light. We didn't run a red. He said, you turn right on a red. And I'm like, and there's no sign here saying I can't turn right on red. What are you talking about? And he's like, you need to calm down. You need to be quiet. At the meantime, there's another cop on the other side still bothering my friend, almost like provoking some kind of reaction, I guess, where they could do something. They don't give me a ticket. They finally let us go. And after I witnessed that, I was you don't even understand the anger. Because it was straight up racism. There was no reason why would you be bothering the passenger? He wasn't driving. And the only thing they gave us was I ran the red light. Well, if I ran the red light, you pull me up, I ran a red light, you give me a ticket. I don't know how else to describe it. It was racism. That changed my whole perspective. My whole perspective is man. And so we start talking as we drive, and over the next few days, he gives me different things. He's like, well, that's happened to me before. I'm like, that's happened to you where? And I'm like, where? Here? And he's like, well, not so much here. And he talked about different places. I can't remember the different places he grew up and different things he had encountered. And I just started thinking, man, that's a world I don't understand. That's a world I don't get that. I don't understand that world. I don't get that world. I don't understand it. I don't get it. The other big thing that happened in my life dealing with race is I went to GemNet High School. It was all white people. There was nobody of any. There may have been people. I think that everybody was white. I think I'd have to go back and think. But some people from Harlem moved here. What happened is basically the father of the family got everyone together one night and said, "I'm sick of New York. I'm sick of Harlem. I'm sick of all of the crime. I'm sick of all of this. We're moving." He grabbed a map, closed his eyes, pointed a finger, and it ended up at a little place called Buffalo Gap, Texas. He sold everything, packed everything into a station wagon. They drove to Buffalo Gap, Texas, and they were the first African Americans to ever walk through the front door of GemNet High School, as far as I know. And I became good friends with the family. I went to their house, hung out with them. They taught me a lot about different things about their culture that I didn't know at the time or didn't understand completely. I learned a lot from them. But for the most part, again, my perspective, for the most part, I think he got along with everyone. I don't think there was too many problems. I don't think there was too many. Far as I remember, I don't remember. But again, see, that's my perspective. So I say all of that to simply say that when it comes to race, we always have to realize that your experience does not equal everyone else's experience. I don't know why that's so complicated. So if an African-American person is saying, I experience racism, and there's racism, who are you as a white person to say, you're a liar, it's not true, and no, and we're not going to talk about it because we're too fragile to talk about it, and you're blaming us, and our country's not racist, and there's never been racism, and we get all sensitive. Why can't we just acknowledge maybe that they've experienced racism? Maybe racism is far more prevalent than we want to acknowledge. Maybe we can acknowledge and I know what we would say. Well, we can't fix what happened in the past. Well, it may be easy for you to say because maybe the racist things that happened in the past still have a profound impact on people of different races. I can read books about the racism of the past, and it just makes me sick, and it's disturbing. Or if I watch a movie about it, it bothers me. But then I move on because it's not it doesn't have any bearing on me. It's never impacted me. It's like just reading a history book. But for many people, they see what happened then in connection with things that happen now, and it's a whole different perspective. We're looking at it from two different points of view. I guess that's the point I want us to see. We have to realize that. So as Christians, if there are Christians who are African American and are talking about racism, should I not, as a Christian, hear their concerns as a fellow brother and sister in Christ? Should I not hear their experiences and try to understand it and try to work and try to understand how we should respond to it? I just think when it comes to racism, it's usually white people who get upset and white people who try to deny it and white people who try to explain it away and white people who get defensive. And I just think that that's not acceptable. I just think that, no, we've got to listen to the other perspective. All right. So let's just understand that right from the start. There's different perspectives. I think that's important. All right. I feel like people will just dismiss that, but you can't dismiss it. All right, we have to be concerned with something. So here's the issue: we all have to agree that there have been horrible things done in regards to race, not only in the history of this country, we could talk about throughout the world. Right? There are things that people have done in regards to race, whether policies, whether slavery, whether Jim Crow laws, you just name all the different things that have been horrible. We have to all acknowledge the evil of the things that have been done. We have to acknowledge that. And we have to acknowledge that there are still things that happen in regards to race that are wrong. Now, here's the issue. From a Christian perspective, how do we understand that wrong? How do we see that? I believe that we have to see racism and the things that have arisen from racism and the things that's happened in our country in regards to race as a symptom of a spiritual problem. The spiritual problem is depravity. The spiritual problem is not seeing human beings as people created in the image of God and that their life is sacred and there's sanctity to their life and that they should be treated in an equal and fair way. I believe that that's the issue. I believe it's a spiritual issue. But just because we say sometimes Christians will do that, it's a spiritual issue. So, let's move on. Okay, well, it's a spiritual issue, but it's a spiritual issue impacting real people of color, real people of different races, real people who are African American brothers and sisters in the Lord. I can't understand what they're experiencing. I can't understand what they're feeling, but I should not dismiss it and act like it's no big deal. It's no big deal where you're sitting in your little white neighborhood, going to your little white church where everything's going great for your little white life. There are other people who are experiencing things that I can't even comprehend. My experience does not equate to reality. Now, I don't know how that's even controversial to say, but I'm going to get someone who's going to try to argue, or trust me, or I'm going to get some racist who's going to say some racist nonsense to me. And at that point, I'm going to have to then pray for patience, because that I get tired of that. I get tired of the racist comments that you can sometimes get but again, it just shows to me, you're just proving how fragile you are. You hear a little discussion about racism, and the next thing you know, you want to just start, you're turning into a social justice. You're turning it into a social gospel. And it's like, calm down. How come every time race gets discussed, it's immediately you throw out social gospel? You've turned from the true God. You're not even a Christian. You're a liberal. Oh, my goodness. How about you stop with your nonsense and name calling and just deal with the fact that racism exists? It does. Now, I truly believe we have to see racism as the fruit of a spiritual problem, just like all the other issues. So I think the only solution is spiritual. I do. Now, that doesn't mean I'm opposed to laws that try to, ensure that people are treated equal and that unjust laws are done away with. Obviously, those have to be done, have to occur. But I'm saying I believe it's a spiritual problem. And I tend to look at, if I see some liberal over there saying, I hate racism is wrong, that's wonderful. I want to say that I agree with them, but I also want to then use that as an opportunity to say, why is it wrong? What makes it wrong? Why do you believe it? Like, what is your basis for this morality? Because then you can get into a deeper discussion that we both believe it's wrong, but we need a basis to say that it's wrong. And I believe it's wrong because human beings are created in the image of God and should be treated as such, as a human being creating the image of God. And they should be treated in an equal, fair, respectful manner. All right. And that racism is ultimate flows from depravity and flows from a sinful nature, and it's ungodly and it's wrong. So I think we have to do it from that perspective. I remember when I first came to this church, I had heard discussion that there may have been some people who were opposed to interracial relationships or interracial marriage, and I just basically said it right from the pulpit. If you're here and you think interracial marriage is wrong, well, then you need to leave this church, because I'm not going to put up with it for 2.3 seconds. I'm not going to put up with that racist nonsense. I didn't have anybody leave, never had any issue, and we have a couple who's interracial who came to our church. And again, here's another example of experience. I'll never forget when he said, "So if I wanted to come to your church, would it be okay because I have a white wife?" And I'm like, "What are you why wouldn't it be okay?" Of course it would be. Why would it not be okay? Why would it not be okay? That's insanity. But they tell me stories of where they were told they were not welcomed in the church because they were an interracial couple. That's insanity. Again, I would never experience that. But here's someone, African American, and they were not allowed to go to certain churches, were rejected from going to certain churches because they were an interracial couple. That is shocking. But again, you white people hear that and go, well, they probably made it up. It's like, why do I have to hear other people's pain and other people's experience? We have to hear it. So first, when we deal with race, we have to understand that whatever racial issue we're dealing with, if it's a racism between African Americans, between whatever race it may be, if you're not of that race, then you've never experienced that. And so we always have to listen to the other side and hear their perspective. It doesn't matter what race it may be, no matter what racial type of issue it is. All right. We have to hear the other side. I just think that's very important. And we have to stop becoming so sensitive to it and stop becoming so I don't know why we're so scared of talking about it. I don't get it. I just don't understand. I just don't get it. So here's the thing. I believe the issue is a spiritual issue. So this raises the question: should critical race theory be utilized by a denomination, by a seminary, or by a church? Now, what do we mean by critical race theory? Right? What do we mean by critical race theory? Well, let me do this. First, let's just give a basic definition. Critical race theory, or CRT, is a framework in jurisprudence that examines society and culture as they relate to categorizations of race, law, and power in the United States of America. So it's a framework in jurisprudence that examines society and culture as they relate to categorizations of race, law, and power in the United States of America. It began as a movement in American law schools in the mid to late 1980s as a reworking of critical legal theory on race issues. As the word critical suggests, both theoretical frameworks are rooted in critical theory, a social philosophy which argues that social problems are influenced and created more by societal structures and cultural assumptions than by individual and psychological factors. All right. It loosely unified by two common themes. First, white supremacy exists and exhibits power maintained over time, and in particular that the law plays a role in this process. So it's one of the things it claims. White supremacy exists and it exhibits power maintained over time, and in particular, the law plays a role in this process. That the law, in some way, shape, or form, has kept the power of white supremacy in place. Again, I'm not asking you to agree. I'm not asking you to disagree. Just helping you understand what critical race theory is. Second, that transforming the relationship between law and racial power, as well as achieving racial emancipation and anti-subordination more broadly, are possible. That there is a way that we can achieve a racial emancipation and anti-subordination, that it is possible. Now, my thought is, again, I believe the issue is depravity. I believe the only hope is the gospel. I believe the only hope. But sadly, even the people who believe in Scripture, many of them will still hold racial ideas while holding on to their Bibles, which then raises all kinds of other questions, because then it comes down what's wrong with their theology, what's wrong with their understanding. Now, the issue is, typically, when we start dealing with critical race theory and intersectionality as it relates to Christianity and how should it be used in the church. Here I have a document from the SBC, the Southern Baptist Convention, on critical race theory and intersectionality. I'm holding it up to the microphone like you can see it. I have this document right here. For example, I'll just read some of this. Concerns have been raised by some evangelicals over the use of frameworks such as critical race theory and intersectionality and critical race theory, whereas critical race theory is a set of analytical tools that explain how race has and continues to function in society, and intersectionality is the study of how different personal characteristics overlap and informs one experience. Critical race theory and intersectionality have been appropriated by individuals with worldviews that are contrary to the Christian faith, resulting in ideologies and methods that contradict scriptures. Evangelical scholars who affirm the authority and sufficiency of Scripture have employed selective insights from critical race theory and intersectionality to understand multifaceted social dynamics. All right, so what they're saying is critical race theory and intersectionality have been used by some people to end up with philosophies and ideas that are not compatible with Christianity and that are in contradiction to Christianity. However, there are some evangelical scholars who've taken certain aspects of critical race theory and intersectionality, and they are arguing have possible being able to use things that have been helpful to explain things. Now, you can say you agree or disagree, but here's the question. Do you believe critical race theory? Do you believe critical race theory is a threat to the American church? Do you believe if your denomination adopts and say critical race theory should be utilized in hermeneutics? Do you believe that then should be the thing that causes you to leave that denomination? Now, my issue is if they're bringing critical race theory into hermeneutics, that's problematic. But I think it's problematic to bring anything into hermeneutics other than just the text of Scripture and the basic rules of interpretation. But here's the thing. People get upset about critical race theory, but they don't seem to have a problem that their pastors and their churches are utilizing basically almost a conservative Republican hermeneutic to interpret the Bible. And they interpret the Bible in light of anything that agrees with Republicans and agree with Trump or agrees with anything on the right. That's problematic as well. But I just don't know how serious a threat critical race theory is to the church. I believe what's the threat to the church is where we bring anything into our hermeneutic, whether it's a conservative viewpoint, a Republican viewpoint, a liberal viewpoint, critical race theory, Christian nationalism, I don't care what it is. When we start bringing these things into the Bible to try to make the Bible agree with our political viewpoints and our viewpoints about society, that's problematic. I don't know. I cannot say how serious a threat it is. I believe racism clearly exists. I've seen it, but I have to be willing to hear those who do experience. And then we need to address racism, but I think we need to address it as a sin problem, a depravity problem. We need to call it out by name. We need to condemn it. When injustices are done to anyone of any race, we need to speak out. When cops overstep their authority and murder someone in an unjust way, it needs to be called out and condemned. Who cares the race of the individual? Whether it's a white person, black, Spanish, doesn't matter. Asian, it doesn't matter. We need to speak out against it because all people are created in the image of God. People, there's a sanctity to their life, no matter their race. We need to see that. That people are not animals. People are creations of God, right? So they have an eternal soul that's going to live forever. We got to get back to seeing people through a biblical perspective. So, but it seems like critical race theory now is, I hate to say this, it's almost become the supervillain. And now if you want to talk about race, you get labeled being someone who believes in critical race theory, and therefore you don't count. You don't matter. You don't matter. You've gone to a social gospel. You now believe in critical race theory, and we're not going to listen to you. You're not even a Christian. We shouldn't listen to you. You're like, but what about the issue of race in the world? What about the problems of racism in the world? What about our country becoming more divided along racial lines? The church has to address that, shouldn't it? Now, I believe it should address it from a biblical perspective and a theological perspective, and acknowledge the error and the sins of the church dealing with race. I mean, many Christians have used the Bible to support their racist views. Let's just acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge that as well. So, how big a problem is critical race theory? Now, we've spent 42 minutes talking about this. I've got 2 audio clips. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but I'm just going to play the first one, and we'll do a little bit of analysis, and then we'll have to come back and talk about this later. My introduction took a lot longer than I wanted to, but I know 42 minutes. That's not even really an introduction. I don't even, that's more than an introduction. That's just a lot of thoughts throwing it out there. It just, whenever I deal with this subject, there's just so many issues because it just seems like you can't talk about it. It just seems like you can't talk about it with everyone getting upset. And it just seems like white people are super defensive. And I think sometimes we don't want to hear other people's experiences. I don't know, but let's at least start this audio clip and see how far we can get. Here we go.
Lifeway Leadership Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, welcome to Ask Me Anything. I want to let you know that we originally planned to release these 2 podcasts as 2 separate podcasts, one a week after the other. One was kind of diving into understanding critical race theory, and then the second one about how to have conversations about it. And as Pastor JD and I recorded and thought about it, we really felt like instead of waiting a week to release one, we just felt like they really kind of belonged together and were really 2 parts of the same conversation. And so we're actually just releasing 2 podcasts on the same week together. And so we would definitely encourage you to listen to both of them back to back because they really are two sides of the same coin, and the second one is an extension of the first one. So just wanted to let you guys know before we hopped in. Honest questions, quick answers. JD, we're definitely going to lean into the honest questions part of this one today. The quick answers, I don't know. Unless you've been living under a rock somewhere in the Christian world, you know that the conversation around CRT is raging. It's raging out there.
If you don't know what we're talking about, pause, search my name on Twitter, and just look at the comments.
And so CRT stands for critical race theory. And JD, the question we have today, I think, is a good one. What should Christians know about critical race theory?
Yeah, so part of the problem, Matt, is that when people say critical race theory, they mean different things by it, functionally speaking. For many, it's an academic term, and it goes back to you'll hear names like the Frankfurt School in Germany, French philosophers like Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, and it comes out of this assumption. It's a way of analyzing power in the world. It comes from the assumption of an evolving universe with no God, where man's not made in the image of God. There's no higher moral law. There's no telos of history that God is working out. But man is the result of entirely material factors or cultural, environmental factors, and so it explains man entirely through those lens, and that's why it connects to people like Karl Marx and Engels and Hegel and those guys. Like I said, it deals with the nature of power and how those in power, in pursuit of the survival of the fittest, seek to stay in power by using certain characteristics to their advantage. And they explain that that's been true in the case of race, that a lot of times these race discussions are really ways for certain groups to either grasp power or maintain power. And so it looks at the lens of what's happened in America through that lens. So that's kind of it in an academic sense. But for many people, critical race theory, critical race theorists, people that have been influenced by critical race theory have made a bunch of observations that they just hadn't heard anywhere before.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this as we were preparing to do this. I mean, there's just been a lot more books coming out recently, How to Be an Anti-Racist, Ibram Kendi, White Fragility, that are kind of geared towards a little bit, they're not like this super high-level academic book, but they're kind of using some of these ideas to make some observations about what's going on in our country.
And you've read some of those books, right?
Yep.
Yeah, as have I. And some of the stuff that you read,
It's
you're
really
like,
helpful.
You're like, actually, I've never looked at it that way
Exactly.
before. I jotted down, Matt, just a few of them with the help of a friend of mine. And here's an example. The modern concept of race is socially constructed to create a racial hierarchy that promotes white dominance. And historically, you can look a little bit that there's aspects of that are certainly true. Throughout American history, it's pointed out that racism has not just been manifested in individual acts of racial animus, but when we're dealing with things like chattel slavery or black codes or Jim Crow or redlining, racism actually got codified into law and embedded into society so that discriminatory damage was actually built into these systems. Mm-hmm. And that means that when somebody ceases to be a racist, well, you still got the system that can be perpetuating that type of racism. It points out that racism can be subtly concealed beneath outward claims of colorblindness and in policies like poll taxes or grandfather clauses, or some people point out the difference in punishments that's given to crack versus cocaine, one being more associated with the black community and one being more associated with the white. It points out that certain groups, like black women, can face what they call intersectional discrimination because they're a part of two groups that are not in the positions of power, both minority in color and also minority in gender. Points out that majority culture. By the way, on that one, it just means that a lot of times there's very subtle ways that they face a more uphill battle when it comes to upward mobility.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we all heard kind of the famous studies of how employers will much more often call back somebody that looks like the name of a white male than they will someone that's a black female.
I mean, they've even changed names. They've done studies where they'll change the name on a resume and rate how people respond to it. If it's male name or female name, it's just people. There's different responses.
Yeah, and those are
things.
Legitimate observations.
Yep.
And critical race theory critical race theorists have at least popularized, though. Here's another one. Majority culture often gets taken for granted as normal. And it puts pressure on people from other cultures to say, well, your culture is cute and everything, and that's exotic, but really this is the way business is done, and this is how we do it. Brian Loritz, one of our pastors here, he points out that if you ask a room full of seminary students to give some characteristics of black preaching, man, they'll just start rattling off, this and that. And he says, ask the same group to give me characteristics of white preaching. And everybody just sort of sits there because white preaching.
What is white preaching?
That's just preaching. That's normal preaching.
Yeah.
And so you use that as a metaphor. It's kind of like whether it's how you dress or how you think about community and family. It's just, it normalizes certain things that are not necessarily, biblical in themselves. Critical race theory points out that people of color often have firsthand experiential knowledge of racism in a way that white people just can't. I mean, it's not saying you can't propositionally understand it, but we all know it's different when you're on the receiving end of it. Yeah, and then, here's one more. Court decisions and policies that appear progressive can sometimes subtly promote white interest, even when on the surface they look like they're colorblind. They're actually not. Those are observations. And by the way, a lot of those come from my friend Neil Shenvi, who is known as a very, very critical person of critical race theory. But he points out that those 8 things are things that critical race theorists have made, if not discovered, at least popularized in our culture.
Yeah.
And so in identifying power dynamics at play in society and illuminating how majority culture, has normalized itself, you can say that there's some helpful observations there. I've heard some of my friends of color say that some of these critical race theorists or people influenced by critical race theory, Robin DiAngelo and Kendi and Coates and those guys, people like that, they'll say that they articulated some things that my friends, recognized were at work in society, but just had never known exactly how to articulate. And so when a lot of Christians see critical race theorists making these claims, they assume like, wow, this is a real servant of the gospel, and it's helpful in creating a more just society, and that's why I think a lot of people are attracted to it.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a helpful kind of unpacking. We wouldn't be asking this question if everybody was just like, yeah, totally, this sounds great. So where's the conflict come in? What's the issue that makes this such kind of a hot button topic?
Yeah, well, great follow-up. Because critical race theory arises from a framework that doesn't start with or even recognize the image of God in man, and doesn't put any weight there on that or God's truth or even God's purpose in the universe, and it puts all the emphasis on the structural shaping forces of man. It assumes that all the problems that we face are created by structure, and thus all the solutions are also going to come from structure. It even sees truth as power grabs, since without an understanding of God in the world, there's no absolute truth to measure things by, and therefore even concepts like justice have ultimately been formed by the majority to help the majority. This is why it gets associated with Marxism a lot, is because that's what Marxists always say, is that Western concepts of justice are done to keep the powerful in power, and that you've got to look suspiciously and cynically at anything of justice because there's obviously a power grab in it. As a result of that, the claims that we went through above, which, we kind of were like, yeah, a lot of those are true, those aren't offered as hypotheses that we should test. Is this happening? Instead, they're just assumptions that follow from the ideological framework, and therefore you just have to accept them. Because, in other words, this is not something we're looking for. It's just, this is the nature of how things are, because this is how the world works, because it's just without God and without the image of God in man. The question is not if there is injustice in the world to be discovered by measuring that against God's justice. The assumption is just that there is. And I'll give you a few examples on this. Critical race theorists don't merely say that racial progress sometimes promotes white self-interest. They just say that racial progress always does promote white self-interest. A very popular African-American Christian leader and thinker, one of his famous statements is, racism never goes away, it just changes forms. And the assumption is that essentially the group in power, white people, are still doing what they were trying to do 150 years ago. Now, that's a legitimate question to ask. Have I just, but if you just assume that's true because it comes out of your worldview, that's the death of Christian unity. And it's a cynicism that cuts against the grain of how the Bible teaches us to see one another and to think of one another. A lot of critical race theorists, they don't believe that laws sometimes are interpreted to preserve the racial status quo. They think the function of the law is to preserve the status quo. They would say that concepts like meritocracy and objectivity, those aren't things that sometimes get perverted to serve the status quo. They would say those very concepts are, they're just impossible to separate. Because they locate the origins of racial problems in the structures of society and not in the fallen human heart, you're going to find that all their salvation involves the adoption of particular political solutions. They're also going to say black people can't be guilty of racism because they're not in the structure of power. Probably the most problematic thing here is that critical race theory interprets resistance to its assumptions as evidence of a commitment to racism and a desire to retain power and privilege. So that's where it becomes really, it leads to it kills a lot of conversations because it starts in the wrong place and therefore it misdiagnoses and ends in the wrong place.
Yeah, so I think as I'm hearing you talk, it sounds like there are some observations made by critical race theorists that can be really helpful and that you and I, like we were talking about, have read and learned from. But the core tenets that led to those observations can be very unhelpful, especially in the context of the church.
Absolutely. I mean, here's the way I would say it in short. The basic ideological approach of critical race theory is incompatible with the Christian worldview. It's the ideological framework. That doesn't mean that it can't make some helpful observations. All truth is God's truth. And honestly, this wouldn't be the first time we in the church have learned helpful things from people on the outside, the mystery of how God does things in the world. As Christians, we want to engage legitimate issues of injustice regardless of who first identified them. But here's the thing. What we're saying is that you don't have to affirm critical race theory to affirm those insights, and you should affirm the insights. And then also, we're also saying that those insights are not exclusive to critical race theory. People, through the lens of the gospel ought to be able to see many of the same things. We do, and I'll just admit this, we do, we as Christians, we subject everything in the world under the lens of Scripture. And when something, is made outside of, something not through the lens of Scripture, we always look at it, I'd say a little cynically and say, all right, what's really at work here? But it just means that we can have a position of humility and learning and listening, even when we're saying, I don't accept the framework, and I realize that's going to cause it to misdiagnose a lot of things. It's going to cause it to put some terms there that aren't helpful, and then also to propose solutions that ultimately will be worse than the problem. The medication is worse than the disease. There's some great stuff out there I've been reading recently. Matt, I know you have also, but Dr. Carl Trueman, who, by the way, is not an American, and he's certainly not known as a culture warrior, but he wrote a really helpful article here recently in First Things called, do you remember the name of that article? Evangelicals
and Race Theory.
Yeah, Evangelicals and Race Theory. It's very helpful, short, to the point, really helps you get your mind around it. More recently, almost finished with a book by a guy named Thaddeus Williams,
I'm reading
professor.
The same book, actually, yeah.
At Biola, yeah. It's fantastic so far. It's not the only book you would read on these questions, but it certainly raises some really good questions. But it's called Confronting Injustice Without Compromising Truth. The foreword is by John Perkins, the African-American civil rights legend and hero. He commends it heartily. But those will help you sort of get your mind around some of the factors that are at work and how you can reject the worldview even as you appreciate certain questions of justice that get raised that Christians ought to care about. Before you read a book by like Kendi or Robin DiAngelo or Ta-Nehisi Coates, I would say read this Thaddeus Williams book because, while you and I said, Matt, that there are some helpful observations in a book like Robin DiAngelo's, there's a lot of stuff that just comes in kind of under the surface. You don't realize that is really coming out of a wrong ideological framework. And like we said, the medication ends up being worse than the disease. And so you got to be able to read these with a discerning mind. And I'm certainly not trying to insult our listeners, but I think a work like Thaddeus Williams that helps you get your mind around biblical categories for justice will actually help you discern any parts that are helpful and then the parts that are massively harmful in a book like DiAngelo's, for example.
And I even think about other books that would be good places to start that are about maybe justice and race issues from a biblical worldview that maybe don't touch on critical race theory as much, but are just helpful in forming that. So think about, we read One Blood as a staff.
Oh yeah, yep.
Dr. John Perkins, and we also have read Oneness Embraced.
By Tony Evans. That was great. Yep.
Great book, and I think those are other ways of.
And George Yancey's Beyond Racial Gridlock is one of the seminal books for me that was so great. Some other people that really helped me with this: Tim Keller wrote a great article on critical race theory. John Piper's had some great stuff on it. Neil Shenvi, a member of our church here. Actually, a lot of the things I've been talking about today come from discussions and correspondence with him. Our own Brian Laritz here has helped me learn to think through some of these things, and we have a lot of good dialogue. So there's some good stuff out there, and I encourage you to press into it.
Well, and I think this will lead into, we're going to actually talk on the next episode a little bit about how to have some of these conversations, because I do think even as you're speaking, I feel like that's what I've noticed at least is missing from the conversations. Is it feels like there's just a tendency to want to take an all or nothing position on everything.
One of the issues here is that a lot of us talk about this in more of an academic sense, when for a lot of African Americans, they'll say, this is lived experience for me. And they're coming at it from a different place. And so we don't want to reduce this to, I love how somebody says it. This doesn't become a weapon that we use to swat down somebody's concerns. It ought to be characterized by, yes, I want to think biblically. I want to think, through the lens of Scripture, but I also want to be first sensitive to where you are experiencing injustice, where you're experiencing discrimination or people putting shame on you or that kind of thing. So
I think that's really good.
Yeah.
I mean, are we having are you having a conversation about the intellectual framework, or are you having a conversation about the observations and how someone's experienced some of these things?
Right. You may think the same, but it'll change the posture and a lot of the tone that you engage in it with.
Well, JD, thanks so much for diving into a complicated topic. I think, unfortunately, there's probably a lot of people that have already decided what they think, but I really do hope that everybody that listens to this engages and says...
And there's another group of people that are sitting there now in the car staring at the radio going, what in the world? I've never heard of this.
Exactly. But
Okay, now, I didn't break into any of that since my introduction basically went so long. I think he's trying to offer a balanced approach. The foundational perspective of critical race theory is not Christian. Some of its observations are good, and if those observations are good, wonderful. So the issue is, do we need critical race theory? I think first and foremost, what we need is a good Bible understanding of how to view our fellow human beings, how to view them as created in the image of God, and to understand that, and how we should speak and condemn injustice when it is wrong, and that we should see things from a biblical perspective. I think the using critical race theory in hermeneutics, how that would even work, no one has really articulated that. That worries me. But again, there are those who would never even consider critical race theory in their hermeneutic. I'm sorry, if you listen to their preaching, they have something else influencing their hermeneutic. It's their political viewpoint. People on the left, their political viewpoint impacts their hermeneutic. People on the right, their political viewpoint impacts their hermeneutic. That's what we need to be against anything impacting our hermeneutic other than basic hermeneutical rules, and basically focus on trying to understand the text. When we bring other things outside of the text and try to read the text in light of that, it's always problematic. So everyone's yelling at critical race theory, it's sweeping the church. And I don't know. I think the problem that's sweeping the church, and listen to me, it's not necessarily critical race theory. It's a political ideology on both sides, left, right, progressive, conservative, Republican, Democrat, and it all comes into people's hermeneutic wanting to read the Bible that way. But I think some of the pushback against critical race theory comes from, I hate to say it, from white people who don't want to deal with the reality of racism and don't want to deal with it because we haven't experienced it. Because we haven't experienced it, then we diminish the experiences of other people. And that's why you get segregated churches. There's the white church, there's the black church. Why does there have to be a white church and a black church? We're Christians. Why can't we just be a church? Why can't the scriptures just be preached? Who cares the color of the people sitting in the pew? But is it because maybe the white church won't address the issues that African Americans are facing? We've got to get past this. I keep hearing how critical race theory is this it's the beginning of the end, and if you're a Christian and you talk about the book White Fragility, people are like, that's it, I'm done with you. You're not a Christian. It's like, why can't you read the book and discuss the concepts in the book? The good, the bad, the ugly. But it's like, you can't do that. Which just seems to say that we're too fragile to talk about race. Let's listen to the second part here. I know we're over an hour, but instead of doing another whole entire episode, we'll just finish it in this one. Let's listen to the next discussion they had. This one's shorter than the previous one. Here we go.
Lifeway Leadership Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, welcome to Ask Me Anything. I'm Matt Love. I'm here with JD Greer. And JD, we are continuing the conversation we had last time on the podcast. Last time we were talking about what Christians should know about critical race theory. And this week we wanted to talk more about, JD, how should Christians have conversations about critical race theory? Because the reason we're asking this question is because on whether it's on social media or in churches or whatever it is, there's just a lot of conversation happening about this. And I think you and I would both agree that some of it is probably not the most healthy conversation right now.
Yeah, in fact, in some ways you might say this is the more important of the question.
Yes.
Because simply getting content out there is we are relational beings, and things that touch things this sensitive are relational questions. They're not questions of the head as much as they are of the heart. And that's, for me, really been a helpful place to start, that some of my friends of color have really helped me to see in this, is that for us, and we said this in the last podcast, for some of us this is more of an academic analyzation, but for many people this is it's an attempt to explain some of the pain, some of the hurt, some of the shame that when these situations happen, they connect to a long history. And yes, we understand that a white person today is not guilty of what a white person did 200 years ago, but there have been ways that our society has been shaped. There's a long memory. There is the legacy of sin, and so it brings into these discussions some of that of that hurt. And so when I'm talking about the presence of systemic injustice, I'm not so much thinking about how to analyze certain trends. I'm also talking about what somebody experienced when they got turned down for a job that they were more than qualified for. Yeah. And so I think that's going into it, which leads me to maybe the first two things I'll say, and then I'd love to hear some of what you got to say on this, Matt, because I know you've been reading a lot and having a lot of discussions on this with people on our team and elsewhere. But it's important, I think, in this to not use a sledgehammer as much as you do a scalpel. We talked last time about how people mean different things by critical race theory, and when you just kind of say critical race theory is bad, then you might be in somebody's heart attacking something that they really feel like is important. And some of those observations we talked about last time. I'm the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, and breaking news. The Southern Baptist Seminary presidents released a statement that condemned CRT, and for obvious reasons, like we talked about last time. I agree with the words of their statement that CRT is not sufficient and it's not compatible with a Christian worldview, but because it was just treated with a sledgehammer and as a blanket statement, there are people who heard that as a denial of systemic injustice, as a denial of kind of white majority normalizations in culture, and some of the things that we said are helpful observations that people from critical race theory or associated with critical race theory have observed. And so I think, I told somebody the other day, I'm fine if we never use the words critical race theory ever again. I kind of want to let's deal with the parts of the worldview that are problematic, and let's counteract those with a biblical view of justice. Let's affirm the observations that are made that are helpful, and let's kind of take it apart and treat it issue by issue, and not use a sledgehammer or a scalpel. I think is more helpful.
Well, I think even on this podcast at one time we were talking with Pastor Brian Loritz, who's on our staff, and he's talking about just the levels of communication and how, I think this is a great example of what level are we communicating in a conversation? Are we staying at this kind of facts, level, or are we having a conversation? Like you're saying, are we engaging with where someone's coming from into the conversation? I think oftentimes it's like in any relationship, if you're having a in-depth conversation, you want to know, where's this person at? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? So that you're not, to your point, right, just kind of coming in with a blunt object and responding poorly to what they're really bringing into it.
Yeah, right. Which leads to, let me give sort of either a second thing or a second category of things here. I think we have to enter this conversation humbly, and one of the ways that we show that is a commitment to listen. There's a reason that Scripture says, be quick to listen and slow to speak, and I can't think of any area in the world that ought to apply more than on this one. And just saying, hey, help me understand this from your perspective. Why does this anger you the way that it does? Why do you assume these things are happening in this? Tell me about your experience. I've had some situations happen where I felt very offended because somebody thought that I was acting in a racially discriminatory way when I wasn't. But when I actually talked to somebody, they explained to me why the actions that I did were interpreted in a racially discriminatory way. Now, that doesn't excuse the person who assumed the worst about my motives, but it does help me understand that my action connects to a long history. And if I'm loving the people around me, I at least want to say, like, how can I make sure that what I'm doing is not interpreted in a way that I don't mean it? And but that only comes from listening.
Yes.
So I think, commitment to listen. I'll add another part of this, which is I think we have to listen to it repentantly. Now, repentance, I can only repent really for my sins. But I can listen. I can listen to this knowing that, it's racism and the drive, the desire to set ourselves above others by taking pride in our racial characteristics or whatever. I always ought to be listening, saying, is this true of my heart?
It should be an easy piece of a Christian worldview to really look at your heart and say, I know I am capable of deep sinfulness.
Right.
And so I think you never want to approach these conversations in this. I think there can be a tendency to approach it defensively instead of, like you're saying, humbly saying, I do want to learn, and I'm so clear that I know I'm a sinful person that if I did sin and there's something I do need to repent of, I want to know. I want to know so I can do that.
That's not the same as adopting the CRT idea that everything that I do as a white person is inherently and inescapably racist. That's not the same. Let me just assume that I'm racist because I'm white. But it is saying I recognize I'm a sinner.
Yes.
And so I listen to it repentantly. And a sister concept of that, not the same, but related, is I should listen to this in a posture of lament. Mm-hmm. Because sin, one of the things we all learned growing up, or at least I learned growing up in my little, Baptist fundamentalist church, was that sin, the legacy of sin is always worse than you thought it was. And that's true of societal sense too. And we don't just, change a law and pass a resolution and just make all the hurt go away. Mm-hmm. We can repudiate what happened in the past, but the effects of chattel slavery, Jim Crow, black codes, redlining, and these concepts, and just the attitude behind those things, those have left a long legacy of pain in the black heart. It's also left damage in the white heart that we, if we're not paying attention, can hand down generation to generation. It's also built some systems that were built with a view toward discrimination that we just need to say, hey, that just left some lasting damage. And for us here in the church, there's an especially important responsibility to lament because for many years, the church was on the sidelines on this, on the wrong side of it, and was complicit in it. Jemar Tisby's book, The Color of Compromise, one of the helpful things in that book is just, kind of painting that legacy that the church had and why sometimes we speak with a compromised voice in this. And so that, again, it doesn't mean that we're responsible for all those things, and it just means that I realize that when I enter the conversation, I'm entering it with some things that I can't pretend that the past hasn't happened, and it shapes how I have conversations in the present. I love reading Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns because she talked about the Great Migration and really how some of where our African-American community lives today was shaped by a lot of just discrimination that they faced and how that has, legacies left in their families, all the way up through today.
I think there's also, I think it's a trilogy or a series by Taylor Branch.
Yeah, Taylor Branch.
That's about the civil rights movement, and I think
Pastor Brian says if you want to understand the civil rights movement, what led into it, what led out of it, that's the series to read by Taylor Branch.
Yeah, and it's really
yeah.
Good.
So understanding some of those things, I think, is a commitment we got to have going into this conversation.
And JD, I think one other element that I know you and I both thought about and talked about, but I think social media is just not the place for this type of conversation. It forces us to condense really complex and relational and fraught ideas into 140 characters or 280 characters, and I feel like that is just a platform that's created a lot of misunderstanding and makes it really easy for us to just assume the worst about people.
Yeah. Let's just go ahead and say it. Let's just not use social media. Let's not use 140 or 280 characters to try to have this conversation because it just never. These things are better done in the context of relationship because for people they're very meaningful. And so we can post like books that have helped us and concepts, but really what we've got to get to is walking with people who aren't exactly like us whose experiences are different. People who enter this conversation wisely, that's always the way they do it. Do they have those people around them? A guy who's been very influential to me, George Yancey, African-American professor who wrote a book called Beyond Racial Gridlock, I referred to in the last podcast. Dr. Yancey said, more important, he says, you can keep reading books, but more important is you just need to sit eye to eye with some friends of color, and them understanding you and you understanding them will do more to further this conversation than certainly hashtagging one another to death, there. And let me just, maybe that's a good place to start to bring this to a close here. We've given what amounts to some warnings for this conversation, I think some very important ones, but I want to emphasize that we've got to have this conversation. I know some people would almost want to flip the script here and say, we just need to stop talking about this altogether and just start talking about the pain and injustice that people of color in our culture have experienced. But ideas have consequences. And the Old Testament gives a large portion to not just talking about injustice, but to actually describe, if you read the law, the nature of injustice and what's fair. How do you respond to injustice and how to think about it? And so I think God wants us to think rigorously about justice and injustice and realize that sometimes when people bring worldviews and terms, they have baggage with them that can make the medication worse than the disease itself. We've talked about how sometimes people in the church will use critical race theory like a club to swat down like someone's legitimate claim of injustice. The moment they start talking about discrimination or they start talking about systemic injustice, you're like, oh, you're just talking about critical race theory and all this. Well, and I agree with that, that happens. On the other side, I think a lot of people use that accusation to avoid talking about the very nature of, justice and the harmful things of critical race theory. And so that becomes a club to say, well, anytime you bring up problems of critical race theory, you're a racist and you're not really sensitive to my pain. So I think we've got to start with the listening to each other, but realize that a rigorous discussion of justice is biblically required. It is helpful for evangelism and pastoring. It's helpful for thinking, and it honors God. We want to make sure that when we help people and we advocate for justice, we're doing it helpfully. There's a book that I read, and I know you've read it too, called When Helping Hurts. Mm-hmm. And it's by Brian Fikkert. And the central thesis of that book is a lot of the help that we try to give to people is good in its motivation, but bad in its application, because we're not using biblical wisdom in how we try to help people. And that certainly happens in a lot of these justice discussions. And when you read the books by D'Angelo and Kendi, a lot of the medication is worse than the disease. So we've got to think biblically about justice and realize that the Bible's worldview and the Bible's concepts and the Bible's solutions are much better than anything that's going to come out of a system that doesn't put God and the gospel at the center.
That's good. Well, we hope this has been helpful, both of these podcasts. And if you...
All right, we'll jump in there and bring this to an end. I will say the following things. Here's what I'm going to do. And I know I spent a lot of time at the beginning just offering some experiences and some perspectives and tried to offer a couple of things. But let me just summarize it this way. Number one, and I have to speak as a white person because that's what I am. I will say it is invaluable for you, if you're listening to me and you're a white person, find someone of color. I don't care if you have to stop them at a convenience store and say, hey, can you become my friend so that I can understand your experiences, because I don't understand. I hear about racism. I hear people talk about racism, but I don't get it. I don't see it. I've never experienced it. Can you help me understand? And the reason I say that is the person who attends this church, who's African American, the times I've gone to breakfast with him or lunch, and he has talked about his experiences, his things that's happened to him in the past, it just opens your eyes to, like, does that world really exist? Like, really? Like, because I'm so far removed from it. I'm like, well, I don't get it. And I think so many times, anytime we hear of racism, it's almost like some white people are like, whatever. Oh yeah, you're right. We're all racist. All white people are racist. Yeah. And it's like, These are human beings, and in many cases, brothers and sisters in the Lord. We have to understand their perspective. Their experience is so crazy. Like, they've experienced things I don't even understand. And in the military, getting to work with lots of people from all kinds of different backgrounds, hearing many of their stories, I'd be like, wait, what? That really happened? Like, are you serious? And sometimes they look at me like, what do you mean did that really happen? I'm like, because I don't, like, you're talking about a world that I don't even understand. And we have to acknowledge that. And we can't just do this. Like, if I'm concerned about racism, and you can't just respond to me like, oh, you believe in critical race theory and you're woke and you believe in social justice and you're a liberal and you're not even a Christian. Whoa, slow down. No, I care about racism because I am a Christian, and we should care about justice. So listen to other people's perspective. Hear what they have to, hear their pain, hear their frustration, hear what they have to say. Listen, expand your horizons a little bit. Become friends with people from different backgrounds and understand. That's one of the wonderful things about being in the military is you met people from so many different backgrounds and got opportunities to hear their story and hear what they went through. That we have to do that. We have to do that. If we don't, sometimes as Christians, we want everyone to hear us, but we're not sometimes willing to listen to anybody else. We got to be willing to listen. Okay, I'm not saying we listen and believe in an unbiblical worldview, but we still need to hear people's perspective. Hear them. They are human beings with their own story. We have to hear that. I think that's number one. We have to do that. Listen to people of color who explain what they've been through, and we acknowledge. And when something that's unjust occurs in society, I don't know why we have to say, okay, yeah, that happened, but we always have to throw in the but. No, when George Floyd was murdered, there should have been everyone should have been upset. I remember when my wife went to march in a protest because of George Floyd's death. That's something that white people should have been more than willing to stand next to people of color going, what happened here was horrible and tragic. But no, if you do that, then you're like, oh, you're liberal, you're woke, or you're just simply saying, listen to everyone. We can't continue with this kind of injustice. Now, again, I believe that injustice, I believe wrong, I believe racism flows from depravity. I believe the only answer ultimately is the gospel. I don't think politics can fix it. I don't think education can ultimately fix it. I think ultimately the gospel. But we have to at least acknowledge the reality of what's happening in people's lives. Now, you could argue, you could sit there and have all of your excuses about what you think. Just be quiet and listen to other people's experience. That's all I'm saying. I'm not telling you to change a worldview. I'm saying just listen to other people's perspective. That's all I'm asking. Just do that, and truly listen to understand. Number two, we need to get a biblical view on justice. Justice is something. It's sad. It's almost like the church. I know within Catholicism they have the 4 cardinal virtues, and justice is one of those cardinal virtues. We talked about that in our study in the Imitation of Christ. I think the Christian church never talked a lot about justice. And we almost left it to the world to say, justice. What do we want? We want justice. When do we want it? We want it now. Right? Okay, they want justice. Well, the church should have been preaching about justice. Do you even have a biblical worldview on the subject of justice? We need a biblical worldview on justice. Right? And the church needs to do that. So I'll stop right there. Hopefully something that occurred here was beneficial. I think in many cases, those 2 podcasts, they said a lot of the things that I was trying to say in a much more concise way, where I just kind of went on with a lot of experiences and a lot of ideas and a lot of thoughts. But it's just so sad that we've reached a point now that if you talk about racism, you're either, this is the way, and he mentioned it. If you talk about racism, oh, you believe in critical race theory, and you're liberal and you're progressive, and you deny the gospel and you're not a Christian. Okay, that's crazy. And if you say, you know what, I think there is some problems with critical race theory, and I don't really want critical race theory as having anything to do with hermeneutics. Oh, you're a racist. Whoa, slow down. no, I'm against anything being brought into hermeneutics, whether it's critical race theory, progressive liberal point of view, or a conservative point of view. We have to use basic rules of hermeneutics to interpret the text. So, there's a lot going on within the American church. I just think some people have gotten so upset over critical race theory that I think in many cases they've elevated it to a major threat to the American church. And I'm just not sure if I believe it's a major threat to the American church. I believe the major threat to the American church is a spiritual sickness. And many of these issues that we see are happening within the church are simply symptoms of the disease of spiritual sickness. That is what I tend to think and believe. You can give me your thoughts on all of this at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. All right, I'll stop right there. Thank you very much. God bless.